Hello and welcome to America in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, executive editor of the Center Square Newswire service. Joining me again today is the Center Square Washington, D.C. bureau chief, Casey Harper. Casey, it is officially summer, but the news out of Washington, D.C. doesn't seem to be taking a break. Pretty big congressional hearing this week into the now debunked allegations that the campaign of former President Donald Trump in 2016 colluded with Russia to try to tilt the race against then Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton in Trump's favor. Special Counsel John Durham investigated the FBI investigation into the Trump campaign, so to speak, and concluded earlier this year that the FBI investigation really never should have taken place to begin with because there was no evidence, and instead it was essentially provoked by the Hillary Clinton campaign. Durham got before Congress this week where he was questioned about his investigation into the investigation. What did we learn?
Yeah, I mean, we got a breakdown of this report that you're referencing. And I was just really struck by how when you kicked off this podcast, this story by talking about the now debunked claims. And it's just amazing because if you had said that a few years ago, you could have been attacked, maligned on Twitter, considered a potential Russian agent just for saying the statement you said now, which is, we all know, is just an established fact. So, and that seems to be a theme of, we've hit on many times on this podcast of things that were once considered conspiracy or misinformation later through, partially through good reporting, but being found out to be true, being verified. This is another example of that. So, there's many things here. Durham's report was over 300 pages. Most interesting probably to many of our listeners is, this is a quote from him. He said, the FBI was too willing to accept and use politically funded and uncorroborated opposition research like the Steele dossier. So to outright call the Steele dossier, which is really the research document that was the basis for the FBI spying on the Trump campaign. I mean, you can call it spying, you can call it monitoring, whatever. I mean, that's another, speaking of other things that were written off as ridiculous conspiracies. When Trump said he was being spied on, people rolled their eyes as like, here we go again with, Trump in 2016. But he was actually right. The FBI was monitoring him in really the late summer of 2016 and beyond. So that's another example of something that was proven true. But for Durham to call this a political opposition research document, that just to have that on the record from the Department of Justice is really interesting because that document basically was funded by the Clinton campaign. But another finding of this report that was really interesting is that the FISA warrant applications, which the FBI kind of has to go through this process to get these warrants to be able to monitor people, they just, according to Durham, they totally abused it. They misused this document to get what they needed. And people have been really skeptical of these FISA warrants for a while now. Behind closed doors, law enforcement can get access to things because they don't want to, and it makes sense, they don't want to reveal their investigations because it can mess up the investigation. But proceedings behind closed doors have been shown again and again to not be very reliable, not to be incredibly integrous. And so I don't know what the answer is there. Of course, there's plenty of examples where it's been used rightly, but we've had some pretty high profile missteps with the FISA system. So like I said, it's a 300-page report here, but we have Durham saying it's politically motivated, basically opposition research. The FBI made a lot of mistakes. They even abused this FISA system, and Trump was right about being spied on.
What I can't get past is that for years, going back to 2016, this Russia collusion allegation against the Trump campaign, it was considered fact. When it turns out it was the Clinton campaign that was colluding with the FBI against the Trump campaign. What I haven't heard in the national conversation about this is, did the Clinton campaign do anything illegal here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, my gut is probably not, unless you could really prove that they had some kind of malintent and power to control within the FBI, because my understanding is what they did is they created this document. They funded this document kind of through multiple groups. They didn't directly create it, but they funded it through multiple groups. And then their legal team handed it over to the FBI and said, hey, you guys should take a look at this. So it seems like most of the fault is on the FBI, but at the same time, has that really been thoroughly investigated? And I would say that has not been investigated enough. No. What was more the origins of that dossier? How did it come about? Was there any wrongdoing associated? I think there's, a lot of unanswered questions on that. But it just goes to this kind of sad, I don't know, it really bothers me, but this trend of the FBI just is having a really bad, I guess, a little more than 5 years, so maybe a really bad decade, right? They took, people really were upset with him for how they felt like they helped Trump. The FBI helped Trump win the election, maybe by talking about Hillary's investigation just a few days before the election, right? But they were also politically involved in spying on Trump. And now we know that in this latest election, the FBI told the social media companies not to run with the Hunter Biden story, which Trump claims swung the election in Joe Biden's favor. And there's no way to really know who would have won an election if hypothetically something hadn't happened, right? What we do know for sure is that in the last 2 presidential elections, the FBI has had a major role in determining the winner. And it should not be that way.
In the aftermath of the Durham hearing this week, Casey, congressional Republicans voted to sanction Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, who in Congress launched an investigation into this now debunked Trump-Russia collusion hoax. Was that just political payback? What's your take on that?
I mean, there is some political payback there, but I think a lot of Republicans in Congress believe that Adam Schiff has crossed the line from politics to actually acting in bad faith, to where maybe he knew what he was doing was wrong or had no basis, and yet he's still pursuing it for political purposes and maybe even being kind of controlled by Democratic interests outside of Congress, I guess I would say. So I think that's where that is coming from. I think it's well within their right. I mean, Congress is getting more and more divided. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more actions like that in the coming years.
Interesting stuff, Casey. I do not know what's next with the now debunked Russia-Trump collusion hoax and all the investigations.
So many investigations.
Yeah, right. Into it. But for any developments, listeners can keep up with the story at thecentersquare.com. We are now out of time. For Casey Harper, I'm Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe, and thank you for listening.